The flashlight's beam trembled over the warped floorboards of the abandoned craftsman house as the detective paused, breath visible in the brittle October chill. His boot nudging aside years of dust until the corner of a sun-bleached photograph surfaced. Half buried, its edges curled, its image frozen, undeniable and quietly devastating. If you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe and like the video. Boise in 1988 was not yet the suburban expanse it would become. The foothills remained largely unlit, the downtown skyline modest, and the air carried the distinct autumn smell of burnt fields and cold irrigation water. That morning, October 17, local police were finalizing what had become the city's most persistent, unresolved missing person case, one centered on the disappearance of a 22-year-old Boise State University photography student named Elaine Porter. She had vanished late in the summer of 1988, last seen crossing the Grove Plaza after a campus darkroom session. Her car remained parked near the dormitory. Her camera equipment sat undisturbed. Her apartment showed no forced entry, no chaos, no note. For nearly a decade, the case traveled through filing cabinets, interview rooms, and seasonal news cycles, always resurfacing with the same cold simplicity. A young woman in her early 20s, simply gone. Elaine had not been the type to run away. Her academic records reflected steady success. Her instructors noted her precision in light studies, composition, and archival methods. Her family, based in nearby Nampa, continued weekly check-ins until they could no longer maintain hope that missed calls meant anything other than what investigators already feared. In the late 80s, Boise police lacked digital traces, cell tower timing, or neighborhood camera systems. Elaine's world existed on negatives, contact sheets, and handwritten logs. Without leads or eyewitness contradiction, the investigation slowed, then hardened, and sat until the mid-90s wave of federal cold case funding and digitization efforts reawakened dormant files. By 1997, the case had a new custodian, Detective Michael Reeves, whose interest in closed-door puzzles made him a deliberate figure in the re-examination of archival cases. Reeves began with ordinary procedure, re-interviewing former classmates, re-examining credit card logs, and requesting any overlooked items from evidence storage. In that request, a mislabeled banker's box emerged from the basement records corridor at the Ada County Sheriff's Office. Inside were unsorted belongings collected from Elaine's bedroom in 1988, packed without full cataloging due to the lack of court authorization for extended search at the time. Included were film rolls, darkroom test prints, and one leather-bound family photo album that seemed inconsistent with the rest of her contemporary photography coursework. The album featured older family images transitioning into her college years, picnic gatherings, a winter trip to McCall, and finally a cluster of candid photographs taken during what appeared to be an off-campus photography retreat in the foothills just north of Boise. Those photos were significant not for content but for repetition. In 3 separate images, a man appeared at the edge of the frame, not fully posed, not interacting with any group member, standing in partial profile, observing. His face was never fully lit. Elaine's notes in the album margins used only a shorthand reference. M. Shutter Study Volunteer Fall Session. No last name, no phone number, no address. The retreat had been conducted under the supervision of a visiting adjunct instructor, and included 10 photography students and 2 assistants. None of the official rosters contained a name beginning with M. Reeves, noted this silent presence as a potential lead. The disappearance timeline held another hinge point. Campus security logs from the evening Elaine vanished indicated she left the darkroom at 9:14. The plaza surveillance was intermittent, capturing only movement shadows between 9:18 and 9:21. 2 witnesses later reported seeing her near 9th Street heading toward Philippi Park, though that route was not her normal route home. The inclusion of the unidentified man in her personal album suggested 2 possibilities. Either he was a benign photography hobbyist with no registration, or someone who existed in the margins of student life, adjacent but unverified. In late 1998, Reeves reconnected with former workshop participants. Their statements revealed that the adjunct instructor responsible for the retreat had relocated to Oregon only months after the program. When reached, he recalled a volunteer model named Mark or Marcus who had joined 2 sessions but was not enrolled at the university. No intake paperwork existed. The adjunct described him as quiet, older than the students, possibly late 20s at the time, and interested in portrait exposure techniques. This profile did not align with any known suspect in the original file, where early focus remained on acquaintances, former boyfriends, and campus employees. As the decade turned, the case remained classified cold, though no longer inactive. Reeves submitted Elaine's film rolls for digital enhancement, including the high-resolution scan of the album's candid images. The 3rd image in which the man appeared showed a slight reflection in a cabin window behind him, enough to capture partial jawline detail and an irregular scarring pattern across the cheek. Although grainy in 1988 development, enhanced imaging allowed forensic analysts to isolate features consistent with a healed dermal laceration. Meanwhile, an unrelated property sale triggered the physical scene that would become pivotal. In early 1999, a historic home on the Boise Bench, long unoccupied, was set for renovation. Contractors reported a lingering odor of mold and rodent nesting. During their floorboard removal, fragments of paper were discovered, including faint film negatives and a student exhibition program featuring Elaine's name. The police were notified, and Reeves arrived at the scene. What emerged from debris was not a body nor any material indicating physical harm, but 2 key items: a faded student pass with Elaine's handwriting and the sun-bleached photograph discovered beneath the floor. It depicted the same retreat group, same season, same location, but in this frame the unidentified man was not at the edges. He stood directly behind Elaine, angled away from the camera, his posture rigid. This was the moment that shifted the case from circumstantial recollection to probable offender focus. Renovation crews confirmed that the house had changed ownership multiple times. One owner from 1986 to 1990 was a man named Marcus H. Lowell, whose public records indicated 2 misdemeanor trespassing charges in his early 20s and no university enrollment. Lowell had worked sporadically as a camera shop clerk near campus, which explained access to the photography department bulletin boards where volunteer requests were posted. His camera store employment coincided exactly with Elaine's sophomore and junior years. With the emerging profile, Reeves obtained permission to search the old camera shop's surviving inventory logs. Lowell had processed several photography students' film during 1987-1988, including at least 8 rolls of Elaine's landscape work. There were no documented complaints, no irregular billing, no missing film. Yet the proximity alone, processing a missing student's work while appearing in her personal album multiple times, created a composite picture of access, obsession, and unchecked involvement. When Reeves located Lowell, now living in Glendale, Arizona under his legal name, not an alias, he presented no immediate sign of flight risk. His employment was stable, his records clean post-1990, and his property ownership unremarkable. But the digital comparison of the enhanced album image with Lowell's current DMV records yielded a match probability exceeding 90%, especially when factoring the unique cheek scar attributed to a motorcycle accident Lowell reported in 1985. This evidence, though not directly violent or incriminating, positioned Lowell as the last undocumented contact. Elaine's disappearance lacked forensic anchors. No remains, no crime scene, no physical link to Lowell beyond location overlap, photography participation, and silent proximity. Boise prosecutors hesitated. Without more, the case risked collapsing in court. Yet Reeves continued, combing through the house renovation site. He located an attic space sealed behind insulation. The contents were minimal: dust-coated frames, expired film canisters, and a single notebook containing light meter readings dated the week before Elaine disappeared. The handwriting matched Lowell's known samples. This notebook placed him in unsanctioned photography sessions with students, including nights without faculty oversight. As 1999 closed, the case stood at a threshold, a coherent suspect with no conclusive trace of Elaine's fate. The town, still holding her image on aging missing posters near Boise State Student Union, braced for either closure or another suspended outcome. In the spring of 2000, the Cold Case Unit authorized a secondary forensic review of all photographic material tied to Elaine's coursework, including previously dismissed darkroom scraps. Among the undeveloped negatives recovered from her apartment box were 3 landscape strips and 1 partial portrait session. When processed under updated chemical standards, the portrait strip revealed something investigators had long suspected but could never articulate. Lowell had not only assisted, but positioned Elaine for what appeared to be an unsanctioned late evening shoot, likely without peer or instructor presence. The angle of artificial light and lack of student comparative subjects indicated the session was unregistered and private, contradicting university protocol. Though not evidence of harm, it represented control, access, and an escalating pattern of fixation that prosecutors could contextualize. Meanwhile, archived payroll records from the camera shop confirmed Lowell's late-night access to the development lab, including after-hours keyholder status. Coupled with testimony from a former employee, investigators established that Lowell often reviewed student negatives without explicit request, citing exposure calibration interest. This practice, while not criminal by the standards of the 1980s, breached privacy norms and reinforced proximity. Elaine, whose work was admired across campus exhibitions, had unknowingly drawn the attention of someone who observed her progress, technique, and personal presence through both lens and laboratory prints. Boise's environment in 2000 remained defined by seasonal inversion, where winter fog settled across the valley and softened the distant foothill outlines. During those weeks of renewed investigation, the public memory of Elaine resurfaced through local press pieces, especially the Idaho Statesman's retrospective on unsolved disappearances. Former classmates described her soft-spoken dedication to light study, her meticulous cataloging of shadow contrast, and her willingness to photograph beyond campus security perimeters. The narrative, once dormant, carried new urgency. Detective Reeves, aware that emotional testimony could not secure conviction, concentrated on procedural precision. He subpoenaed the adjunct instructor's original attendance notes from the retreat. In the margins, lightly penciled, appeared 2 initials never previously scanned, ML next to them, a notation reading Volunteer Return Session Untouched. That return session occurred 3 days before Elaine's disappearance. No other student attended. The adjunct later admitted he had forgotten to record it formally, having assumed the volunteer arrangement remained benign. This revelation established Lowell as the final confirmed participant in Elaine's movement timeline, placing him with her in remote terrain shortly before she vanished. The case shifted from circumstantial pattern to structured prosecutorial framework. Without a physical scene, prosecutors relied on behavioral chronology, photographic trace evidence, and situational dominance. Lowell, older, unregistered, with institutional access to her developing work and unsupervised retreat presence. By summer 2000, a grand jury convened to assess whether Lowell could be indicted for kidnapping, resulting in presumed homicide based on disappearance evidence. The proceedings remained sealed. The state required more. That more arrived through a link neither forensic nor testimonial but archival. Elaine's family, recontacted for renewed interviews, provided a second album, one that had not been included in the original evidence seizure because it had been stored in a trunk at her sister's home in Caldwell. This album contained earlier prints, including portraits of students on campus lawns during spring 1987. Once magnified through digital scanning, Lowell appeared in background presence across 3 separate campus events, each time positioned near Elaine's camera line, but not engaged in recognizable interaction. Law enforcement consulted behavioral analysts who identified this pattern as not incidental but consistent with predatory observation. Recurring physical presence without social integration, maintaining periphery while tracking subject movement. In October 2000, Reeves secured a warrant for Lowell's Glendale residence. The search uncovered decades-old camera equipment, outdated development chemicals, and boxes of contact sheets. Among the meticulously organized materials were dozens of Boise State associated negatives. While most contained general campus imagery, several directly mirrored Elaine's known work. Identical locations, identical framing, but from alternate angles. Lowell had shadowed her shoots. He had documented her documenting. Still absent was definitive evidence of her fate. That changed in early 2001, when analysts examined dust particulates and soil embedded in the contact sheet box edges. The composition matched a specific stretch of dry hillside clay unique to Camel's Back Park, north of downtown Boise. This matched the geography of the retreat and the unscheduled late session. Investigators executed a targeted terrain search using ground-penetrating radar. While no remains surfaced, radar indicated prior disturbance consistent with soil compression and refilling during the late 1980s period. Forensic botanists identified non-native grass species in an irregular growth pattern, further suggesting ground alteration. This allowed prosecutors to reconstruct an evidence-based narrative. Lowell tracked Elaine's sessions, gained silent access to her academic progression, inserted himself into retreat photography, and likely intercepted her on the night she deviated from her routine route home. Without direct remains, the state relied on disappearance statute allowances, which, if sustained by corroborative pattern, could permit conviction. In March 2001, Lowell was arrested and charged with first-degree kidnapping and felony homicide in relation to Elaine Porter's disappearance. The Boise courthouse, often quiet except during agricultural disputes and municipal zoning hearings, filled with local press. The trial emphasized the spare discipline of true cold case litigation. No dramatic testimony, no sensational display, simply the layered reconstruction of proximity, access, and pattern. Key testimony came from the renovation crew, who discovered the album photograph under Lowell's former floorboards. Photographic aging analysis confirmed the print had been stored there since late 1988 or early 1989. This placed Lowell not just in passive observation, but in possession of material evidence linking him to Elaine beyond campus boundaries. His defense argued mere coincidence, citing photography culture's open volunteer participation. But the prosecution presented sequence: 5 separate photographic intersections, unrecorded retreat attendance, late-night darkroom access, and quiet pursuit evidenced across 2 years of background presence. The absence of physical remains demanded judicial clarity. Idaho law permitted conviction on circumstantial evidence when disappearance, timeline, and suspect behavior aligned beyond reasonable doubt. The jury reviewed every enlargement of each candid frame. They studied the reflector light glint on Lowell's injured cheek, the positioning behind Elaine in the floorboard photograph, and his annotated light meter notebook from the weeks before she vanished. In their deliberation, they faced not violence but intent, the slow, methodical pursuit of a subject whose life was visually, academically, and quietly observed into disappearance. On June 28, 2001, Lowell was found guilty on all charges. The courtroom atmosphere held no audible reaction. Elaine's family, aged by waiting but anchored in steady composure, accepted the verdict without outward expression. Lowell was sentenced to life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 35 years, a procedural consequence of late 1980s statutory limits. The case closed legally, but archivally it continued. For Boise, Elaine's absence remained woven into the campus landscape, where her final exhibition print stayed preserved in the university's photographic archive. The cold morning discovery of a single album image beneath rotting boards had collapsed a decade of uncertainty, demonstrating how static evidence, paper, ink, light captured and forgotten, could reanimate investigative direction. The case did not end with dramatic recovery, but with forensic patience, legal discipline, and the quiet, definitive conclusion that proximity becomes proof when image becomes motive. With Lowell incarcerated, the legal resolution stood firm, yet the investigative file remained open in a supplemental capacity for one final objective: to determine, as precisely as possible, the location of Elaine's final trace within Boise's shifting landscape. Cold case analysts, now working with improved geographic information systems and sedimentation comparison models, returned to Camel's Back Park in 2002. Seasonal thaw exposed shallow root disturbance in the same quadrant their earlier ground-penetrating radar scans had flagged. Although no human remains were recovered, the site's soil composition matched particulates from Lowell's stored contact sheet boxes with near-perfect alignment, reinforcing prosecutorial sequencing and confirming the court's conclusion that the hillside had served not simply as a photography location, but as the terminal geography of Elaine's trajectory. In an administrative sense, the case was fully adjudicated. Yet detectives and archivists continued the quiet work of curating the evidence, ensuring its preservation within the Ada County record system. The photo albums, once ordinary containers of memory, became primary artifacts in jurisprudence, demonstrating how still images may override the absence of physical remains. Under Boise's collection standards, each photograph was digitized, color-corrected only to the extent necessary for facial clarity, and stored within the sheriff's secure database, where they would remain available for future legal reviews, academic criminology study, and any appeals that might arise decades later. Elaine's name, once printed on missing person flyers across telephone poles and grocery store corkboards, gradually transitioned from public alert to archival caption. The tone of Boise during these years remained subdued, not marked by spectacle but by rural continuity. Winter roads lined with frost, downtown storefronts closing early in snow season, students cutting across quiet pedestrian corridors toward dormitories lit with soft fluorescent circles. Those who remembered her spoke not in shock, but in the steady cadence of recollection, recognizing that her disappearance had reshaped local understanding of campus security and photographic practice supervision in the late 1980s. The Boise State Photography Department revised its protocols in 2003, limiting volunteer access, enforcing roster requirements, and restricting darkroom hours. Though no official statement referenced Elaine directly, faculty correspondence archived in university records reflected clear influence. In effect, her absence created structural change, prompting institutions to refine boundaries between academic exploration and unsupervised external involvement. These administrative shifts were subtle, unpublicized, and characteristic of a university, adapting quietly to the shadows of a resolved case. Within the state penitentiary system, Lowell entered his sentence without appeals during the initial years. Psychological evaluations noted no acute disorders, no confessions, and no disciplinary incidents. He remained quiet, detached, living within the procedural rhythm of imprisonment. The law, in his circumstance, functioned as designed. Evidence, not admission, had justified conviction. In rare review interviews, he provided no elaboration, no retaliation, simply compliance with institutional regulation. The emotional void, while notable, held no legal consequence. Idaho's jurisprudence had already confirmed his involvement through layered forensic reasoning and photograph-linked presence. By 2005, Boise's downtown redevelopment advanced, and the old camera shop where Lowell once processed students' film was replaced by a modern storefront. Its demolition removed the last physical site connecting Lowell to Elaine beyond archives and testimony. Yet the state retained all relevant ledgers, ensuring that time could not erode institutional record. Where dust-covered boxes once sat in police storage, cataloging enhancements provided cross-referenced indexing, enabling future investigators or scholars to trace every film strip, every exposure annotation, every student roster, even though the case no longer required active inquiry. For Elaine's family, closure remained muted. With no burial, no definitive recovery, their commemoration rested in Boise's campus garden memorial, where a small brass plate listed her name among students lost to accident, illness, and violent disappearance. Her photograph, professionally printed matte finish, high contrast, hung in the library's archival wing, its caption pared down to essential facts. Name, 1966–1988, case concluded. The library staff, aware of the sensitivity, maintained the portrait in understated neutrality, neither spotlighted nor obscured. Journalistic retrospectives occasionally revisited the case, focusing on the evidentiary uniqueness, resolution by image rather than recovered physical trace. The Idaho Statesman published a 2008 10th anniversary reflection titled simply Light and Proof, describing how an unassuming album displaced beneath floorboards transformed a dormant file into prosecutorial certainty. Media references remained controlled, factual, absent of dramatic narrative, consistent with Boise's cautious tone. The investigative team, particularly Reeves, transitioned to retirement shortly after 2009. His final internal memorandum summarized the case in the language of procedural finality, evidence convergence, suspect exclusivity, timeline closure, and legal sufficiency. He cited the album as the central pivot, emphasizing that the suspect's self-placement in visual documentation undermined any claim of incidental presence. The act of appearing repeatedly, silently, at the periphery of Elaine's academic progression constituted the connective tissue that bridged absence to identification. Photographic forensic analysis continued to evolve nationwide, and training academies reference the Porter case as precedent in identifying offender fixation patterns through consistent background proximity rather than overt interaction. Crime scene curricula included slides demonstrating how light studies, frame repetition, and vantage positioning revealed behavioral escalation. Elaine's work, once academic exploration, became an inadvertent forensic ledger, capturing Lowell's pattern across time. Boise's cultural memory integrated the case with characteristic reserve. Neighborhood streets changed, university enrollment expanded, and local governance shifted toward urban development priorities. Still, the foothills retained their familiar shape, and Camel's Back Park continued receiving hikers, dog walkers, and unattended quiet. The hillside that likely held the final trace of Elaine's movement was never marked publicly. Officials determined that permanent signage would shift the terrain from natural landscape to commemorative site, and the family requested no memorialization beyond the campus garden. Thus, the hillside remained unaltered, a place of resolution without announcement, closure without display. In subsequent years, the parole board convened according to statutory schedule. Lowell's first eligibility hearing remained remote, procedural, and brief. Without admission, remorse argumentation remained moot. Given the weighted circumstantial scope and continued family opposition to release, parole was denied. The decision, recorded in succinct administrative language, reaffirmed the permanence of the court's conclusion. As decades progressed, the case's influence persisted more in institutional memory than public consciousness. The Boise Police Department's Cold Case Division cited it as an example of long-form evidentiary patience. The university's photography archives maintained her negatives under controlled climate conditions, ensuring their continued viability for academic study. The Camera Club Scholarship, founded anonymously in 2012, bore no explicit reference to Elaine, yet faculty understood its timing and purpose: to honor pursuit of light without risking unsupervised vulnerability. The narrative of Elaine Porter and Marcus Lowell concluded not in revelation, but in administrative precision. The images, once private documentation of coursework, became the medium through which justice was constructed. In a world accustomed to confessional closure, this case affirmed a different standard: that proof can reside in stillness, that presence captured without consent becomes testimony, and that resolution may emerge not through recovered remains, but through the quiet alignment of recorded observation. Boise moved on, not by forgetting, but by absorbing the case into its municipal continuity. Downtown lights extended farther each year, campus buildings rose with improved security thresholds, and the foothills remained as backdrop, steady above suburban expansion. Elaine's name persisted in records, in the cool climate of archival storage, in the precise grain of her final photographs. The cold case, once suspended between absence and uncertainty, achieved lawful endpoint. The evidence, unembellished and unsensational, held its ground. Lowell lived within the sentence ordered by statute. Elaine, though not recovered, was no longer missing in the legal sense. In the measured cadence of investigative conclusion, the city retained both memory and distance, carrying neither spectacle nor silence, only the enduring record of light captured, frame by frame, until the truth became fixed.